This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 66. Matrimonial Projects. The day following this scene, at the hour the banker usually chose to pay a visit to Madame Danglars on his way to his office, his coupé did not appear. At this time, that is, about 12:30, Madame Danglars ordered her carriage and went out. Danglars, hidden behind a curtain, watched the departure he had been waiting for. He gave orders that he should be informed as soon as Madame Danglars appeared. But at 2 o'clock she had not returned. He then called for his horses, drove to the chamber, and inscribed his name to speak against the budget. From 12 to 2 o'clock, Danglars had remained in his study, unsealing his dispatches, and becoming more and more sad every minute, heaping figure upon figure, and receiving, among other visits, one from Mayor Cavalcanti, who, as stiff and exact as ever, presented himself precisely at the hour named the night before to terminate his business with the banker. On leaving the chamber, Danglars, who had shown violent marks of agitation during the sitting, and been more bitter than ever against the ministry, re-entered his carriage, and told the coachman to drive to the Avenue des Champs-Élysées, number 30. Monte Cristo was at home, only he was engaged with someone, and begged Danglars to wait for a moment in the drawing-room. While the banker was waiting in the anteroom, the door opened, and a man dressed as an abbé, and doubtless more familiar with the house than he was, came in, and instead of waiting, merely bowed, passed on to the further apartments, and disappeared. A minute after, the door by which the priest had entered reopened, and Monte Cristo appeared. "Pardon me," he said, "my dear Baron, but one of my friends, the Abbé Busoni, whom you perhaps saw pass by, has just arrived in Paris. Not having seen him for a long time, I could not make up my mind to leave him sooner, so I hope this will be sufficient reason for my having made you wait." "Nay," said Danglars, "it is my fault. I have chosen my visit at a wrong time, and I will retire." "Not at all. On the contrary, be seated. But what is the matter with you? You look careworn. Really, you alarm me. Melancholy is a capitalist, like the appearance of a comet, presages some misfortune to the world." "I have been in ill luck for several days," said Danglars, "and I have heard nothing but bad news." "Ah, indeed?" said Monte Cristo. "Have you had another fall at the Bourse?" "No, I'm safe for a few days at least. I'm only annoyed about a bankrupt of Trieste." "Really? Does it happen to be Jacopo Manfredi?" "Exactly so. Imagine a man who has transacted business with me for I don't know how long, to the amount of 800,000 or 900,000 francs during the year, never a mistake or delay. A fellow who paid like a prince. Well, I was a million in advance with him, and now my fine Jacopo Manfredi suspends payment." "Really?" "It is an unheard-of fatality. I draw upon him for 600,000 francs. My bills are returned and paid. I hold bills of exchange signed by him to the value of 400,000 francs, payable at his correspondent's in Paris at the end of this month. Today is the 30th. I present them, but my correspondent has disappeared. This, with my Spanish affairs, made a pretty end to the month." "Then you really lost by that affair in Spain?" "Yes, only 700,000 francs out of my cash box, nothing more." "Why, how could you make such a mistake, such an old stagger?" "Oh, it's all my wife's fault. She dreamed Don Carlos had returned to Spain. She believes in dreams. It is magnetism, she says, and when she dreams a thing, it is true to happen, she assures me. On this conviction, I allow her to speculate. She having her bank and her stockbrokers, she speculated and lost. It is true she speculates with her own money, not mine. Nevertheless, you can understand that when 700,000 francs leave the wife's pocket, The husband always finds it out. But do you mean to say you have not heard of this? Why, the thing has made a tremendous noise." "Yes, I heard it spoken of, but I did not know the details. And then, no one can be more ignorant than I am of the affairs in the Bourse." "Then you do not speculate?" "I? How could I speculate when I already have so much trouble in regulating my income? I should be obliged, besides my steward, to keep a clerk and a boy. But touching these Spanish affairs, I think that the Baroness did not dream the whole of the Don Carlos matter. The papers said something about it, did they not?" "Then you believe the papers?" "Aye, not the least in the world. Only I fancied that the honest messenger was an exception to the rule, and that it only announced telegraphic dispatches." "Well, that's what puzzles me," replied Danglars. "The news of the return of Don Carlo was brought by telegraph." "So that," said Monte Cristo, "you have lost nearly 1,700,000 francs this month." "Not nearly, indeed. That is exactly my loss." "Diable," said Monte Cristo compassionately, "it is a hard blow for a third-rate fortune." "Third-rate?" said Danglars, rather humble. "What do you mean by that?" "Certainly," continued Monte Cristo, "I make 3 assortments of fortune: first-rate, second-rate, and third-rate fortunes. I call those first-rate which are composed of treasures one possesses under one's hand, such as mines, lands, and funded property, in such states as France, Austria, and England, provided these treasures and property form a total of about 100 millions. I call those second-rate fortunes that are gained by manufacturing enterprises, joint stock companies, viceroyalties, and principalities, not drawing more than 1,500,000 francs, the whole forming a capital of about 50 millions. Finally, I call those third-rate fortunes which are composed of a fluctuating capital, dependent upon the will of others, or upon changes which a bankruptcy involves or a false telegram shakes, such as banks, speculations of the day. In fact, all operations under the influence of greater or less mischances, the whole bringing in a real or fictitious capital of about 15 millions. I think this is about your position, is it not?" "Confound it, yes," replied Danglars. "The result, then, of 6 more such months as this would be to reduce the third-rate house to despair." "Oh," said Danglars, becoming very pale, "how you are running on! Let us imagine 7 such months," continued Monte Cristo in the same tone. "Tell me, have you ever thought that 7 times 1,700,000 francs make nearly 12 millions? No, you have not. Well, you are right, for if you indulged in such reflections, you would never risk your principle, which is to the speculator what the skin is to civilized men. We have our clothes, some more splendid than others. This is our credit. But when a man dies, he has only his skin. In the same way, on retiring from business, you have nothing but your real principal, of about 5 or 6 millions at the most, for third-rate fortunes are never more than a fourth of what they appear to be, like the locomotive of a railway, the size of which is magnified by the smoke and steam surrounding it. Well, out of the 5 or 6 millions which form your real capital, you have just lost nearly 2 millions, which must, of course, in the same degree diminish your credit and fictitious fortune. To follow out my simile, your skin has been opened by bleeding, and this, if repeated 3 or 4 times, will cause death. So pay attention to it, my dear Monsieur Danglars. Do you want money? Do you wish me to lend you some?" "What a bad calculator you are!" exclaimed Danglars, calling to his assistance all his philosophy and dissimulation. "I have made money at the same time by speculations which have succeeded. I have made up the loss of blood by nutrition. I lost a battle in Spain. I have been defeated in Trieste. But my naval army in India will have taken some galleons, and my Mexican pioneers will have discovered some mine. Very good, very good. But the wound remains, and will reopen at the first loss. No, for I am only embarked in certainties, replied Danglars, with the air of a mountebank sounding his own praises. To involve me, 3 governments must crumble to dust. Well, such things have been. That there should be a famine. Recollect the 7 fat and the 7 lean kine. Or that the sea should become dry, as the day of Pharaoh, and even then my vessels would become caravans. So much the better. I congratulate you, my dear Monsieur Danglars, said Monte Cristo. I see I was deceived, and that you belong to the class of second-rate fortunes. I think I may aspire to that honor, said Danglars with a smile, which reminded Monte Cristo of the sickly moons which bad artists are so fond of daubing into their pictures of ruins. But while we are speaking of business, Danglars added, pleased to find an opportunity of changing the subject, tell me, what am I to do for Monsieur Cavalcanti? Give him money if he is recommended to you, and the recommendation seems good. Excellent. He presented himself this morning with a bond of 40,000 francs, payable at sight on you, signed by Busoni, and returned by you to me, with your endorsement. Of course, I immediately counted him over the 40 banknotes. Monte Cristo nodded his head in token of assent. But that is not all, continued Danglars. He has opened an account with my house for his son. May I ask how much he allows the young man? 5,000 francs per month. 60,000 francs per year. I thought I was right in believing that Cavalcanti to be a stingy fellow. How can a young man live upon 5,000 francs a month? But you understand that if the young man should want a few thousands more, do not advance it. The father will never repay it. You do not know these ultramontane millionaires. They are regular misers. And by whom were they recommended to you? Oh, by the house of Fenzi, one of the best in Florence. I do not mean to say you will lose, but nevertheless, mind you hold to the terms of the agreement. Would you not trust the Cavalcanti? I? Oh, I would advance 6 millions on his signature. I was only speaking in reference to the second-rate fortunes we were mentioning just now. And with all this, how unassuming he is! I should never have taken him for anything more than a mere mayor. And you would have flattered him, for certainly, as you say, he has no manner. The first time I saw him, he appeared to me like an old lieutenant who had grown mouldy under his epaulettes. But all the Italians are the same. They are like all Jews when they are not glittering in oriental splendor. The young man is better, said Danglars. Yes, a little nervous perhaps, but upon the whole he appeared tolerable. I was uneasy about him. Why? Because you met him at my house, just after his introduction into the world, as they told me. He has been travelling with a very severe tutor, and had never been to Paris before. Ah, I believe noblemen marry amongst themselves. Do they not? Asked Danglars carelessly. They like to unite their fortunes. It is usual, certainly. But Cavalcanti is an original who does nothing like other people. I cannot help thinking that he had brought his son to France to choose a wife. Do you think so? I am sure of it. And you have heard his fortune mentioned? Nothing else was talked of. Only some said he was worth millions, and others that he did not possess a farthing. And what is your opinion? I owe not to influence you, because it is only my own personal impression. Well, and it is that? My opinion is that all these old podestas, these ancient condottieri, for the Cavalcanti have commanded armies and governed provinces, my opinion, I say, is that they have buried their millions in corners, the secret of which they have transmitted only to their eldest sons, who have done the same from generation to generation, and the proof of this is seen in their yellow and dry appearance, like the florins of the Republic, which from being constantly gazed upon have become reflected in them. Certainly, said Danglars, and this is further supported by the fact of their not possessing an inch of land. Very little at least. I know of none which Cavalcanti possesses, except in his palace in Lucca. Ah, he has a palace, said Danglars, laughing. Come, that is something. Yes, and more than that, he lets it to the Minister of Finance, while he lives in a simple house. Oh, as I told you before, I think the old fellow is very close. Come, you do not flatter him. I scarcely know him. I think I have seen him 3 times in my life. All I know relating to him is through Busoni and himself. He was telling me this morning that, tired of letting his property lie dormant in Italy, which is a dead nation, he wished to find the method, either in France or England, of multiplying his millions. But remember that though I place great confidence in Busoni, I am not responsible for this. Never mind. Accept my thanks for the client you have sent me. It is a fine name to inscribe on my ledgers, and my cashier was quite proud of it when I explained to him who the Cavalcanti were. By the way, this is merely a simple question. When this sort of people marry their sons, do they give them any fortune? Ah, that depends upon circumstances. I know an Italian prince, rich as a gold mine, one of the noblest families in Tuscany, who, when his sons married according to his wish, gave them millions, and when they married against his consent, merely allowed them 30 crowns a month. Should André marry according to his father's views, he will perhaps give him 1, 2, or 3 millions. For example, supposing it were the daughter of a banker, he might take an interest in the house of the father-in-law of his son. Then again, if he dislikes his choice, the mayor takes the key, double-locks his coffer, and Master Andrea would be obliged to live like the sons of a Parisian family, by shuffling cards or rattling the dice. Oh, that boy will find out some Bavarian or Peruvian princess. He will want a crown and an immense fortune. No, these grand lords of the other side of the Alps frequently marry into plain families. Like Jupiter, they like to cross the race. But do you wish to marry Andrea, my dear Monsieur Danglars, that you are asking so many questions? Ma foi, said Danglars, it would not be a bad speculation, I fancy, and you know I'm a speculator. You are not thinking of Mademoiselle Danglars, I hope. You would not like poor Andrea to have his throat cut by Albert. Albert? Repeated Danglars, shrugging his shoulders. Ah, well, he would care very little about it, I think. But he is betrothed to your daughter, I believe? Well, Monsieur de Morcerf and I have talked about this marriage, but Madame de Morcerf and Albert... You do not mean to say that it would not be a good match? Indeed, I imagine that Mademoiselle Danglars is as good as Monsieur de Morcerf. Mademoiselle Danglars' fortune would be great, no doubt, especially if the telegraph should not make any more mistakes. Oh, I do not mean her fortune only, but tell me. What? Why did you not invite Monsieur and Madame de Morcerf to your dinner? I did so, but he excused himself on account of Madame de Morcerf being obliged to go to Dieppe for the benefit of sea air. Yes, yes, said Danglars, laughing. It would do her a great deal of good. Why so? Because it is the air she always breathed in her youth. Monte Cristo took no notice of this ill-natured remark. But still, if Albert is not so rich as Mademoiselle Danglars, said the Count, you must allow that he has a fine name. So he has, but I like mine as well. Certainly, your name is popular, and does honour to the title they have adorned it with. But you are too intelligent not to know that according to a prejudice too firmly rooted to be exterminated, a nobility which dates back 5 centuries is worth more than one that can only reckon 20 years. And for this very reason, said Danglars with a smile, which he tried to make sardonic, I prefer Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti to Monsieur Albert de Morcerf. Still, I should not think de Morcerf would yield to the Cavalcanti. De Morcerf? Stay, my dear Count, said Danglars. You are a man of the world, are you not? I think so. And you understand heraldry? A little. Well, look at my coat of arms. It is worth more than Morcerf's. Why so? Because, though I'm not a baron by birth, my real name is at least Danglars. Well, what then? While his name is not Morcerf. How? Not Morcerf? Not the least in the world. Go on. I have been made a baron, so that I actually am one. He made himself a count, so that he is not one at all. Impossible. Listen, my dear Count, Monsieur de Morcerf has been my friend, or rather my acquaintance, during the last 30 years. You know I have made the most of my arms, though I never forgot my origin. A proof of great humility, or great pride, said Monte Cristo. Well, when I was a clerk, Morcerf was a mere fisherman. And then he was called Fernand. Only Fernand? Fernand Mondego. You are sure? Pardieu, I have bought enough fish of him to know his name. Then why did you think of giving your daughter to him? Because Fernand and Danglars, being both parvenus, both having become noble, both rich, are about equal in worth, excepting that there have been certain things mentioned of him that were never said of me. What? Oh, nothing. Ah, yes. What you tell me recalls to mind something about the name of Fernand Mondego. I have heard that name in Greece. In conjecture with the affairs of Ali Pasha? Exactly so. This is the mystery, said Danglars. I acknowledge I would have given anything to find it out. It would be very easy if you much wished it. How so? Probably you have some correspondent in Greece. I should think so. At Yanina? Everywhere. Well, write to your correspondent in Yanina, and ask him what part was played by a Frenchman named Fernand Mondego in the catastrophe of Ali Tepelini. You are right, exclaimed Danglars, rising quickly. I will write today. Do so. I will. And if you should hear of anything very scandalous, I will communicate it to you. You will oblige me. Danglars rushed out of the room and made but one leap into his coupé. End of chapter 66.
This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recorded by Dan Three Trees. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, Chapter 67. At the Office of the King's Attorney. Let us leave the banker driving his horses at their fullest speed, and follow Madame Danglars in her morning excursion. We have said that at 12:30 o'clock Madame Danglars had ordered her horses, and had left home in the carriage. She directed her course toward the Faubourg Saint-Germain, went down the Rue Mazarine, and stopped at the Passage du Pont Neuf. She descended, and went through the passage. She was very plainly dressed, as would be the case with a woman of taste walking in the morning. At the Rue Guénégaud she called a cab, and directed the driver to go to the Rue de Harlay. As soon as she was seated in the vehicle, she drew from her pocket a very thick black veil, which she tied on to her straw bonnet. She then replaced the bonnet, and saw with pleasure, in a little pocket mirror, that her white complexion and brilliant eyes were alone visible. The cab crossed the Pont Neuf and entered the Rue de Harlay by the Place Dauphine. The driver was paid as the door opened, and stepping lightly up the stairs, Madame Danglars soon reached the Salle des Pas Perdus. There was a great deal going on that morning, and many business-like persons at the Palais. Business-like persons pay very little attention to women, and Madame Danglars crossed the hall without exciting any more attention than any other woman calling upon her lawyer. There was a great press of people in Monsieur de Villefort's antechamber, but Madame Danglars had no occasion even to pronounce her name. The instant she appeared, the doorkeeper rose, came to her, and asked her whether she was not the person with whom the procureur had made an appointment, and on her affirmative answer being given, he conducted her by a private passage to Monsieur de Villefort's office. The magistrate was seated in an armchair, writing, with his back towards the door. He did not move as he heard it open, and the doorkeeper pronounced the words, "Walk in, madame," and then reclose it. But no sooner had the man's footsteps ceased than he started up, drew the bolts, closed the curtains, and examined every corner of the room. Then, when he had assured himself that he could neither be seen nor heard, and was consequently relieved of doubts, he said, "Thanks, madame, thanks for your punctuality." And he offered a chair to Madame Danglars, which she accepted, for her heart beat so violently that she felt nearly suffocated. "It is a long time, madame," said the procureur, describing a half-circle with his chair so as to place himself exactly opposite to Madame Danglars. "It is a long time since I had the pleasure of speaking alone with you, and I regret that we have only now met to enter upon a painful conversation." "Nevertheless, sir, you see I have answered your first appeal, although certainly the conversation must be much more painful for me than for you." Villefort smiled bitterly. "It is true, then," he said, rather uttering his thoughts aloud than addressing his companion. "It is true, then, that all our actions leave their traces, some sad, some bright, on our paths. It is true that every step in our lives is like the course of an insect on the sands. It leaves its track. Alas, to many the path is traced by tears." "Sir," said Madame Danglars, "you can feel for my emotion, can you not? Spare me then, I beseech you. When I look at this room, whence so many guilty creatures have departed, trembling and ashamed, when I look at that chair before which I now sit trembling and ashamed, oh, it requires all my reason to convince me that I am not a very guilty woman and you a menacing judge." Villefort dropped his head and sighed. "And I," he said, "I feel that my place is not in the judge's seat, but on the prisoner's stool." "You?" said Madame Danglars. "Yes, I." "I think, sir, you exaggerate your situation," said Madame Danglars, whose beautiful eyes sparkled for a moment. "The paths of which you were just speaking have been traced by all young men of ardent imaginations. Besides the pleasure, there is always remorse from the indulgence of our passions, and after all, what have you men to fear from all this? The world excuses and notoriety ennobles you." "Madame," replied Villefort, "you know that I am no hypocrite, or at least that I never deceive without a reason. If my brow be severe, it is because many misfortunes have clouded it. If my heart be petrified, it is that it might sustain the blows it has received. I was not so in my youth. I was not so on the night of the betrothal, when we were all seated around a table in the Rue du Coeur at Marseille. But since then, everything has changed in and about me. I am accustomed to brave difficulties, and in the conflict to crush those who, by their own free will, or by chance, voluntarily or involuntarily, interfere with me in my career. It is generally the case that what we most ardently desire is as ardently withheld from us by those who wish to obtain it, or from whom we attempt to snatch it. Thus, the greater number of a man's errors come before him disguised under the specious form of necessity. Then, after error has been committed in a moment of excitement, of delirium, or of fear, we see that we might have avoided and escaped it. The means we might have used, which we in our blindness could not see, then seem simple and easy, and we say, 'Why did I not do this instead of that?' Women, on the contrary, are rarely tormented with remorse, for the decision does not come from you. Your misfortunes are generally imposed upon you, and your faults the results of others' crimes." "In any case, sir, you will allow," replied Madame Danglars, "that even if the fault were mine alone, I last night received a severe punishment for it." "Poor thing," said Villefort, pressing her hand. It was too severe for your strength, for you were twice overwhelmed, and yet... Well? Well, I must tell you. Collect all your courage, for you have not yet heard all. Ah! Exclaimed Madame Danglars, alarmed. What is there more to hear? You only look back to the past, and it is, indeed, bad enough. Well, picture to yourself a future more gloomy still, certainly frightful, perhaps sanguinary. The Baroness knew how calm Villefort naturally was, and his present excitement frightened her so much that she opened her mouth to scream, but the sound died in her throat. How has this terrible past been recalled? Cried Villefort. How is it that it has escaped from the depths of the tomb and the recesses of our hearts where it was buried, to visit us now like a phantom, whitening our cheeks and flushing our brows with shame? Alas, said Hermine, doubtless it is chance. Chance, replied Villefort. No, no, madame, there is no such thing as chance. Oh, yes. Has not a fatal chance revealed all this? Was it not by chance the Count of Monte Cristo bought that house? Was it not by chance he caused the earth to be dug up? Is it not by chance that the unfortunate child was disinterred under the trees, that poor innocent offspring of mine, which I never even kissed, but for whom I wept many, many tears? Ah, my heart clung to the Count when he mentioned the dear spoil found beneath the flowers. Well, no, madame. This is the terrible news I have to tell you, said Villefort in a hollow voice. No, nothing was found beneath the flowers. There was no child disinterred. No. You must not weep. No, you must not groan. You must tremble. What can you mean? Asked Madame Danglars, shuddering. I mean that Monsieur de Monte Cristo, digging underneath these trees, found neither skeleton nor chest, because neither of them was there. Neither of them there? Repeated Madame Danglars, her staring, wide-open eyes expressing her alarm. Neither of them there, she said again, as though striving to impress herself with the meaning of the words which escaped her. No, said Villefort, burying his face in his hands. No, 100 times no. Then you did not bury the poor child there, sir? Why did you deceive me? Where did you place it? Tell me, where? There. But listen to me, listen, and you will pity me who has for 20 years alone borne the heavy burden of grief I am about to reveal, without casting the least portion upon you. Oh, you frighten me, but speak, I will listen. You recollect that sad night, when you were half expiring on that bed in the red damask room, while I, scarcely less agitated than you, awaited your delivery. The child was born, was given to me, motionless, breathless, voiceless. We thought it dead. Madame Danglars moved rapidly, as though she would spring from her chair, but Villefort stopped and clasped his hands as if to implore her attention. We thought it dead, he repeated. I placed it in the chest, which was to take the place of a coffin. I descended to the garden, I dug a hole, and then flung it down in haste. Scarcely had I covered it with earth, when the arm of the Corsican was stretched towards me. I saw a shadow rise, and at the same time a flash of light. I felt pain. I wished to cry out, but an icy shiver ran through my veins and stifled my voice. I felt lifeless, and fancied myself killed. Never shall I forget your sublime courage when, having returned to consciousness, I dragged myself to the foot of the stairs, and you, almost dying yourself, came to meet me. We were obliged to keep silent upon the dreadful catastrophe. You had the fortitude to regain the house, assisted by your nurse. A duel was the pretext for my wound. Though we scarcely expected it, our secret remained in our own keeping alone. I was taken to Versailles. For 3 months I struggled with death. At last, as I seemed to cling to life, I was ordered to the south. 4 men carried me from Paris to Chalons, walking 6 leagues a day. Madame de Villefort followed the litter in her carriage. At Chalons I was put upon the Saône. Thence I passed on to the Rhône, whence I descended, merely with the current, to Arles. At Arles I was again placed on my litter, and continued my journey to Marseille. My recovery lasted 6 months. I never heard you mentioned, and I did not dare inquire for you. When I returned to Paris, I learned that you, the widow of Monsieur de Nargonne, had married Monsieur Danglars. What was the subject of my thoughts from the time consciousness returned to me? Always the same. Always the child's corpse, coming every night in my dreams, rising from the earth, and hovering over the grave with menacing look and gesture. I inquired immediately on my return to Paris. The house had not been inhabited since we left it, but it had just been let for 9 years. I found the tenant. I pretended that I disliked the idea that a house belonging to my wife's father and mother should pass into the hands of strangers. I offered to pay them for cancelling the lease. They demanded 6,000 francs. I would have given 10,000. I would have given 20,000. I had the money with me. I made the tenant sign the deed of resolution, and when I had obtained what I so much wanted, I galloped to Auteuil. No one had entered the house since I had left it. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I ascended into the Red Room and waited for night. There all the thoughts which had disturbed me during my year of constant agony came back with double force. The Corsican, who had declared the vendetta against me, who had followed me from Nîmes to Paris, who had hid himself in the garden, who had struck me, had seen me dig the grave, had seen me inter the child. He might become acquainted with your person, nay, he might even then have known it. Would he not one day make you pay for keeping this terrible secret? Would it not be a sweet revenge for him when he found that I had not died from the blow of his dagger? It was therefore necessary, before everything else, and at all risks, that I should cause all traces of the past to disappear, that I should destroy every material vestige. Too much reality would always remain in my recollection. It was for this I had annulled the lease. It was for this I had come. It was for this I was waiting. Night arrived. I allowed it to become quite dark. I was without a light in that room. When the wind shook all the doors, behind which I continually expected to see some spy concealed, I trembled. I seemed everywhere to hear your moans behind me in the bed, and I dared not turn around. My heart beat so violently that I feared my wound would open. At length, one by one, all the noises in the neighborhood ceased. I understood that I had nothing to fear, that I should neither be seen nor heard, so I decided upon descending to the garden. Listen, Hermine. I consider myself as brave as most men, but when I drew from my breast the little key of the staircase, which I had found in my coat, that little key we both used to cherish so much, which you wished to have fastened to a golden ring, when I opened the door and saw the pale moon shedding a long stream of white light on the spiral staircase like a spectre, I leaned against the wall and nearly shrieked. I seemed to be going mad. At last I mastered my agitation. I descended the staircase step by step. The only thing I could not conquer was a strange trembling in my knees. I grasped the railings. If I had relaxed my hold for a moment, I should have fallen. I reached the lower door. Outside this door a spade was placed against the wall. I took it, and advanced towards the thicket. I had provided myself with a dark lantern. In the middle of the lawn I stopped to light it. Then I continued my path. It was the end of November. All the verdure of the garden had disappeared. The trees were nothing more than skeletons with their long bony arms, and the dead leaves sounded on the gravel under my feet. My terror overcame me to such a degree as I approached the thicket that I took a pistol from my pocket and armed myself. I fancied continually that I saw the figure of the Corsican between the branches. I examined the thicket with my dark lantern. It was empty. I looked carefully around. I was indeed alone. No noise disturbed the silence but an owl, whose piercing cry seemed to be calling up the phantoms of the night. I tied my lantern to a forked branch I had noticed a year before, at the precise spot where I had stopped to dig the hole. The grass had grown very thickly there during the summer, and when autumn arrived no one had been there to mow it. Still, one place where the grass was thin attracted my attention. It evidently was there I had turned up the ground. I went to work. The hour then, for which I had been waiting during the last year, had at length arrived. How I worked, how I hoped, how I struck every piece of turf, thinking to find some resistance to my spade. But no, I found nothing, though I had made a hole twice as large as the first. I thought I had been deceived, had mistaken the spot. I turned around, I looked at the trees, I tried to recall the details which had struck me at the time. A cold, sharp wind whistled through the leafless branches, and yet the drops fell from my forehead. I recollected that I was stabbed just as I was trampling the ground to fill up the hole. While doing so, I had leaned against a laburnum. Behind me was an artificial rockery intended to serve as a resting place for persons walking in the garden. In falling, my hand, relaxing its hold of the laburnum, felt the coldness of the stone. On my right I saw the tree, behind me the rock. I stood in the same attitude and threw myself down. I rose, and again began digging and enlarging the hole. Still I found nothing, nothing. The chest was no longer there. The chest no longer there, murmured Madame Danglars, choking with fear. Think not I contented myself with this one effort, continued Villefort. No, I searched the whole thicket. I thought the assassin, having discovered the chest and supposing it to be a treasure, had intended carrying it off, but, perceiving his error, had dug another hole and deposited it there, but I could find nothing. Then the idea struck me that he had not taken these precautions and had simply thrown it in a corner. In the last case I must wait for daylight to renew my search. I remained in the room and waited. Oh, heavens! When daylight dawned, I went down again. My first visit was to the thicket. I hoped to find some traces which had escaped me in the darkness. I had turned up the earth over a surface of more than 20 feet square and a depth of 2 feet. A laborer would not have done in a day what occupied me an hour, but I could find nothing, absolutely nothing. Then I renewed the search. Supposing it had been thrown aside, it would probably be on the path which led to the little gate. But this examination was as useless as the first, and with a bursting heart I returned to the thicket, which now contained no hope for me. "Oh," cried Madame Danglars, "it was enough to drive you mad." "I hoped for a moment that it might," said Villefort, "but that happiness was denied me. However, recovering my strength and my ideas, 'Why,' said I, 'should that man have carried away the corpse?' "'But you said,' replied Madame Danglars, 'he would require it as a proof.' "'Ah, no, madame, that could not be. Dead bodies are not kept a year. They are shown to a magistrate, and the evidence is taken. Now nothing of the kind has happened." "What then?" asked Hermine, trembling violently. "Something more terrible, more fatal, more alarming for us. The child was, perhaps, alive, and the assassin may have saved it." Madame Danglars uttered a piercing cry, and, seizing Villefort's hands, exclaimed, "My child was alive?" said she. "You buried my child alive? You were not certain my child was dead, and you buried it? Ah!" Madame Danglars had risen, and stood before the procureur, whose hands she wrung in her feeble grasp. "I know not. I merely suppose so, as I might suppose anything else," replied Villefort with a look so fixed, it indicated that his powerful mind was on the verge of despair and madness. "Ah, my child, my poor child!" cried the Baroness, falling on her chair and stifling her sobs in her handkerchief. Villefort, becoming somewhat reassured, perceived that to avert the maternal storm gathering over his head, he must inspire Madame Danglars with the terror he felt. "You understand, then, that if it were so," said he, rising in his turn and approaching the Baroness to speak to her in a lower tone, "we are lost. This child lives, and someone knows it lives. Someone is in possession of our secret, and since Monte Cristo speaks before us of a child disinterred, when that child could not be found, it is he who is in possession of our secret." "Just God! Avenging God!" murmured Madame Danglars. Villefort's only answer was a stifled groan. "But the child? The child, sir?" repeated the agitated mother. "How I have searched for him," replied Villefort, wringing his hands. "How I have called him in my long sleepless nights. How I have longed for royal wealth to purchase 1,000,000 of secrets from 1,000,000 of men, and to find mine among them. At last, one day, when for the 100th time I took up my spade, I asked myself again and again what the Corsican could have done with the child. A child encumbers a fugitive. Perhaps, on perceiving it was still alive, he had thrown it into the river." "Impossible!" cried Madame Danglars. "A man may murder another out of revenge, but he would not deliberately drown a child." "Perhaps," continued Villefort, "he had put it in the foundling hospital." "Oh, yes, yes!" cried the Baroness. "My child is there." I ran to the hospital and learned that the same night, the night of the 20th of September, a child had been brought there, wrapped in part of a fine linen napkin, purposely torn in half. This portion of the napkin was marked with half a baron's crown and the letter H. Truly, truly, said Madame Danglars, all my linen is marked thus. Monsieur de Nargonne was a baronet, and my name is Hermine. Thank God, my child was not then dead. No, it was not dead. And can you tell me so without fearing to make me die of joy? Where is the child? Villefort shrugged his shoulders. Do I know? Said he. And do you believe that if I knew, I would relate to you all its trials and all its adventures, as would a dramatist or a novel writer? Alas, no, I know not. A woman, about 6 months after, came to claim it with the other half of the napkin. This woman gave all the requisite particulars, and it was entrusted to her. But you should have inquired for the woman. You should have traced her. And what do you think I did? I feigned a criminal process and employed all the most acute bloodhounds and skilful agents in search of her. They traced her to Chalon, and there they lost her. They lost her? Yes, forever. Madame Danglars had listened to this recital with a sigh, a tear, or a shriek for every detail. And this is all? Said she. And you stopped there? Oh, no, said Villefort. I never ceased to search and to inquire. However, the last 2 or 3 years I had allowed myself some respite, but now I will begin with more perseverance and fury than ever, since fear urges me, not my conscience. But, replied Madame Danglars, the Count of Monte Cristo can know nothing, or he would not seek out our society as he does. Oh, the wickedness of man is very great, said Villefort, since it surpasses the goodness of God. Did you observe that man's eyes while he was speaking to us? No. But have you ever watched him carefully? Doubtless he is capricious, but that is all. One thing alone struck me. Of all the exquisite things he placed before us, he touched nothing. I might have suspected he was poisoning us. And you see you would have been deceived. Yes, doubtless. But believe me, that man has other projects. For that reason I wish to see you, to speak to you, to warn you against everyone, but especially against him. Tell me, cried Villefort, fixing his eyes more steadfastly on her than he had ever done before, did you ever reveal to anyone our connection? Never, to anyone. You understand me, replied Villefort affectionately. When I say anyone, pardon my urgency, to anyone living, I mean. Yes, yes, I understand very well, ejaculated the Baroness. Never, I swear to you. Were you ever in the habit of writing in the evening what had transpired in the morning? Do you keep a journal? No, my life has been passed in frivolity. I wish to forget it myself. Do you talk in your sleep? I sleep soundly, like a child. Do you not remember? The color mounted to the Baroness's face, and Villefort turned awfully pale. It is true, said he, in so low a tone that he could hardly be heard. Well, said the Baroness. Well, I understand what I now have to do, replied Villefort. In less than 1 week from this time I will ascertain who this Monsieur de Monte Cristo is, whence he comes, where he goes, and why he speaks in our presence of children that have been disinterred in a garden. Villefort pronounced these words with an accent which would have made the Count shudder had he heard him. Then he pressed the hand the Baroness reluctantly gave him, and led her respectfully back to the door. Madame Danglars returned in another cab to the passage, on the other side of which she found her carriage and her coachman sleeping peacefully on the box while waiting for her. End of chapter 67.
This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Reading by Robin Cotter, Toronto, Ontario, September 2006. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 68. A Summer Ball. The same day, during the interview between Madame Danglars and the procureur, a travelling carriage entered the Rue de Helder, passed through the gateway of No. 27, and stopped in the yard. In a moment the door was opened, and Madame de Morcerf alighted, leaning on her son's arm. Albert soon left her, ordered his horses, and having arranged his toilette, drove to the Champs-Élysées, to the house of Monte Cristo. The Count received him with his habitual smile. It was a strange thing that no one ever appeared to advance a step in that man's favor. Those who would, as it were, force a passage to his heart, found an impassable barrier. Morcerf, who ran towards him with open arms, was chilled as he drew near, in spite of the friendly smile, and simply held out his hand. Monte Cristo shook it coldly, according to his invariable practice. "Here I am, dear Count." "Welcome home again." "I arrived an hour since." "From Dieppe?" "No, from Tréport." "Indeed." "And I have come at once to see you." "That is extremely kind of you," said Monte Cristo with a tone of perfect indifference. "And what is the news?" "You should not ask a stranger, a foreigner, for news." "I know it, but in asking for news, I mean, have you done anything for me?" "Had you commissioned me?" said Monte Cristo, feigning uneasiness. "Come, come," said Albert, "do not assume so much indifference. It is said sympathy travels rapidly, and when at Tréport I felt the electric shock, you have either been working for me or thinking of me." "Possibly," said Monte Cristo. "I have indeed thought of you, but the magnetic wire I was guiding acted, indeed, without my knowledge." "Indeed? Pray tell me how it happened." "Willingly. Monsieur Danglars dined with me." "I know it. To avoid meeting him, my mother and I left town." "But he met here Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti." "Your Italian prince?" "Not so fast. Monsieur Andrea only calls himself Count." "Calls himself, do you say?" "Yes, calls himself." "Is he not a count?" "What can I know of him? He calls himself so. I, of course, give him the same title, and everyone else does likewise." "What a strange man you are! What next? You say Monsieur Danglars dined here?" "Yes, with Count Cavalcanti, the Marquis his father, Madame Danglars, Monsieur and Madame de Villefort, charming people, Monsieur Debray, Maximilien Morrel, and Monsieur de Château Renaud." "Did they speak of me?" "Not a word." "So much the worse." "Why so? I thought you wished them to forget you." "If they did not speak of me, I am sure they thought about me, and I am in despair." "How will that affect you, since Mademoiselle Danglars was not among the number here who thought of you? Truly, she might have thought of you at home." "I have no fear of that; or, if she did, it was only in the same way in which I think of her." "Touching sympathy. So you hate each other?" said the count. "Listen," said Morcerf. "If Mademoiselle Danglars were disposed to take pity on my supposed martyrdom on her account, and would dispense with all matrimonial formalities between our two families, I am ready to agree to the arrangement. In a word, Mademoiselle Danglars would make a charming mistress, but a wife? Diable!" "And this," said Monte Cristo, "is your opinion of your intended spouse?" "Yes. It is rather unkind, I acknowledge, but it is true. But as this dream cannot be realized, since Mademoiselle Danglars must become my lawful wife, live perpetually with me, sing to me, compose verses and music within 10 paces of me, and that for my whole life, it frightens me. One may forsake a mistress, but a wife? Good heavens! There she must always be, and to marry Mademoiselle Danglars would be awful." "You are difficult to please, Viscount." "Yes, for I often wish for what is impossible." "What is that?" "To find such a wife as my father found." Monte Cristo turned pale and looked at Albert, while playing with some magnificent pistols. "Your father was fortunate, then?" said he. You know my opinion of my mother, Count. Look at her, still beautiful, witty, more charming than ever. For any other son to have stayed with his mother for 4 days at Tréport, it would have been a condescension or a martyrdom, while I return more contented, more peaceful, shall I say more poetic, than if I had taken Queen Mab or Titania as my companion. That is an overwhelming demonstration, and you would make every one vow to live a single life. Such are my reasons for not liking to marry Mademoiselle Danglars. Have you ever noticed how much a thing is heightened in value when we obtain possession of it? The diamond which glittered in the window at Marles or Fossin's shines with more splendor when it is our own. But if we are compelled to acknowledge the superiority of another, and still must retain the one that is inferior, do you not know what we have to endure?" "Worldling," murmured the Count. "Thus I shall rejoice when Mademoiselle Eugénie perceives I am but a pitiful atom, with scarcely as many 100,000 francs as she has millions." Monte Cristo smiled. "One plan occurred to me," continued Albert. "Franz likes all that is eccentric. I tried to make him fall in love with Mademoiselle Danglars, but in spite of 4 letters, written in the most alluring style, he invariably answered, 'My eccentricity may be great, but it will not make me break my promise.'" "That is what I call devoted friendship, to recommend to another whom you would not marry yourself." Albert smiled. "Apropos," continued he, "Franz is coming soon, but it will not interest you. You dislike him, I think." "I?" said Monte Cristo. "My dear Viscount, how have you discovered that I did not like Monsieur Franz? I like everyone." "And you include me in the expression everyone. Many thanks." "Let us not mistake," said Monte Cristo. "I love everyone as God commands us to love our neighbor, as Christians. But I thoroughly hate but a few. Let us return to Monsieur Franz d'Épinay. Did you say he was coming?" "Yes, summoned by Monsieur de Villefort, who is apparently as anxious to get Mademoiselle Valentine married as Monsieur Danglars is to see Mademoiselle Eugénie settled." "It must be a very irksome office to be the father of a grown-up daughter. It seems to make one feverish, and to raise one's pulse to 90 beats a minute until the deed is done." "But Monsieur d'Épinay, unlike you, bears his misfortune patiently. Still more, he talks seriously about the matter, puts on a white tie, and speaks of his family. He entertains a very high opinion of Monsieur and Madame de Villefort." "Which they deserve, do they not?" "I believe they do. Monsieur de Villefort has always passed for a severe but a just man." "There is then one," said Monte Cristo, "whom you do not condemn like poor Danglars." "Because I am not compelled to marry his daughter, perhaps," replied Albert, laughing. "Indeed, my dear sir," said Monte Cristo, "you are revoltingly foppish." "I foppish? How do you mean?" "Yes, pray take a cigar, and cease to defend yourself, and to struggle to escape marrying Mademoiselle Danglars. Let things take their course. Perhaps you may not have to retract." "Bah!" said Albert, staring. "Doubtless, my dear Viscount, you will not be taken by force. And seriously, do you wish to break off your engagement?" "I would give 100,000 francs to be able to do so." "Then make yourself quite easy. Monsieur Danglars would give double that sum to attain the same end." "Am I indeed so happy?" said Albert, who still could not prevent an almost imperceptible cloud passing across his brow. "But, my dear Count, has Monsieur Danglars any reason?" "Ah, there is your proud and selfish nature. You would expose the self-love of another with a hatchet, but you shrink if your own is attacked with a needle." "But yet Monsieur Danglars appeared delighted with you, was he not?" "Well, he is a man of bad taste, and is still more enchanted with another. I know not whom. Look and judge for yourself." "Thank you. I understand. But my mother— no, not my mother. I mistake. My father intends giving a ball." "A ball at this season? Summer balls are fashionable." "If they were not, the Countess has only to wish it, and they would become so." "You are right. You know they are select affairs. Those who remain in Paris in July must be true Parisians. Will you take charge of our invitation to Messieurs Cavalcanti?" "When will it take place?" "On Saturday." "Monsieur Cavalcanti's father will be gone." "But the son will be here. Will you invite young Monsieur Cavalcanti?" "I do not know him, Viscount." "You do not know him?" "No, I never saw him until a few days since, and am not responsible for him." "But you receive him at your house?" "That is another thing. He was recommended to me by a good abbé who may be deceived. Give him a direct invitation, but do not ask me to present him. If he were afterwards to marry Mademoiselle Danglars, you would accuse me of intrigue and would be challenging me. Besides, I may not be there myself." "Where?" "At your ball." "Why should you not be there?" "Because you have not yet invited me." "But I come expressly for that purpose." "You are very kind, but I may be prevented." "If I tell you one thing, you will be so amiable as to set aside all impediments." "Tell me what it is." "My mother begs you to come." "The Comtesse de Morcerf?" said Monte Cristo, starting. "Ah, Count," said Albert, "I assure you Madame de Morcerf speaks freely to me, and if you have not felt those sympathetic fibres of which I spoke just now thrill within you, you must be entirely devoid of them, for during the last 4 days we have spoken of no one else." "You have talked of me?" "Yes, that is the penalty of being a living puzzle." "Then I am also a puzzle to your mother? I should have thought her too reasonable to be led by imagination." "A problem, my dear Count, for everyone, for my mother as well as others. Much studied, but not solved. You still remain an enigma, do not fear." "My mother is only astonished that you remain so long unsolved. I believe, while the Countess G. takes you for Lord Ruthven, my mother imagines you to be Cagliostro or the Count Saint-Germain. The first opportunity you have, confirm her in her opinion. It will be easy for you, as you have the philosophy of the one and the wit of the other." "I thank you for the warning," said the count. "I shall endeavor to be prepared for all suppositions." "You will, then, come on Saturday?" "Yes, since Madame de Morcerf invites me." "You are very kind." "Will Monsieur Danglars be there?" "He has already been invited by my father. We shall try to persuade the great d'Aguesseau, Monsieur de Villefort, to come, but have not much hope of seeing him." "Never despair of anything," says the proverb. "Do you dance, Count?" "I dance?" "Yes, you. It would not be astonishing." "That is very well before one is over 40. No, I do not dance, but I like to see others do so." "Does Madame de Morcerf dance?" "Never. You can talk to her. She so delights in your conversation." "Indeed?" "Yes, truly, and I assure you, you are the only man of whom I have heard her speak with interest." Albert rose and took his hat. The count conducted him to the door. "I have one thing to reproach myself with," said he, stopping Albert on the steps. "What is it?" "I have spoken to you indiscreetly about Danglars." "On the contrary, speak to me always in the same strain about him." "I am glad to be reassured on that point." "Apropos, when do you expect Monsieur d'Épinay?" 5 or 6 days hence at the latest." "And when is he to be married?" "Immediately on the arrival of Monsieur and Madame de Saint Méran." "Bring him to see me. Although you say I do not like him, I assure you I shall be happy to see him." I will obey your orders, my lord. Good-bye. Until Saturday, when I may expect you, may I not? Yes, I promised you. The Count watched Albert, waving his hand to him. When he had mounted his phaeton, Monte Cristo turned, and seeing Bertuccio, "What news?" said he. "She went to the Palais," replied the steward. "Did she stay long there?" "An hour and a half." "Did she return home?" "Directly." "Well, my dear Bertuccio," said the Count, "I now advise you to go in quest of the little estate I spoke to you of in Normandy." Bertuccio bowed, and as his wishes were in perfect harmony with the order he had received, he started the same evening. End of chapter 68.